Jacqueline Hornberg here, and welcome to another edition of Rural Ramble on the Road. Today we're heading out to the Ontario Beef Research Centre, which is owned by the Agriculture Research Institute of Ontario and managed by the University of Guelph. This state-of-the-art facility helps to drive innovation and supports sustainability and prosperity for the beef sector here in Ontario as well as across Canada. Today we're going to be talking about pasture research that's being done. It's a pleasure to be joined by Courtney Higgins, a master's student in plant agriculture, working with Dr. Kim Schneider. Thanks for joining us, Courtney. Can you please tell us a little bit about your research and what question it is that you were trying to answer in your work?
So for the last 2 years, I've been working on calibrating the rising plate meter, where our main question is whether or not the rising plate meter could be calibrated under Ontario's mixed species perennial pastures. And ultimately, our objective was to create a calibration that could be used in the field for producers going forward.
Can you tell us about what your findings were from this research project?
So ultimately, we did end up determining a calibration to estimate pasture biomass using the rising plate meter, where a slope or a conversion factor of 165 can be multiplied by the reading on the rising plate meter to produce your pasture biomass estimate in kilograms of dry matter per hectare. And this will enable you to understand what is in your pastures for grazing. So the rising plate meter is a really simple tool to use, and it consists of a weighted disc, a shaft, a little counter that will give you your measurement, and then a dial that also determines how many times you've taken a reading across the paddock. The plate meter basically works by placing it over a piece of forage and letting the shaft slide through. The forage will then hold up the plate and you'll receive a measurement on your plate meter. The plate meter measures in compressed sward height and uses intervals of half centimeters. So a couple important things you need to do when using the plate is record your start reading on your dial and then your end reading, and then you'll also divide by 2 after subtracting those 2 values to get your measurement of compressed sward height.
How many measurements do you actually need to take to ensure you have accurate reading?
So typically across a pasture or paddock, we look for about 30 readings. Right now we're standing in a paddock that's about 1 acre, and we can take about 68 in like 2 minutes. So obviously the more measurements you're taking, the more accurate your reading's going to be, but it can be within your time frame, and as long as you're hitting that minimum of 30, you'll usually get a good representative measurement. So in order to determine my compressed sward height after walking a paddock, I would have recorded my start number on here, and then from that I would also record my end reading after I've walked a pasture. And then I would subtract those 2 numbers and divide by 2 to account for the half centimeter intervals that the rising plate meter measures in. After doing that, I would take my number of plonks, or the number of readings I took across the pasture, and divide by that number, which would ultimately give me my average compressed sward height for the pasture. That number can then be applied to our calibration, which will estimate your amount of pasture biomass available for grazing. So the rising plate meter is beneficial at different times of the year, and it can help you make decisions about when to move your animals, or how soon to move them, or how many animals to leave on your pasture at a time. For producers using rotational grazing, it's a really, really big benefit. Additionally, when you get into that summer slump period where your grass isn't necessarily growing as consistently as it is in the spring, it might help you make better estimates of what you have left for your grazing season.
So what is next for research in this area?
So currently this calibration is a preliminary step for Ontario pastures, and Dr. Kim Schneider's lab and ONAFR will continue to work on validating the calibration we created, while further understanding how the influence of species may play a role, and the potential for early season and late season calibration that can help make more sound estimates of pasture biomass.
To learn more about research going on at the University of Guelph and the Ontario Beef Research Centre, please see the links in this video description. Thanks for joining us, and we hope to see you next time in Rural Ramble on the Road.